Hello, welcome. It's Frances here. Thank you for coming back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I bid thee welcome. There is a subscribe button below if you would like to help support this channel by subscribing, and also a bell to be notified as to when I upload more content. I'm coming to you from Kaurna country, and as such, I acknowledge the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains as being the traditional custodians of these lands. So this video, I just want to talk a little bit about Venus. One of the astrologers that I do follow mentioned 4 weeks ago that Venus had reappeared this time as the evening star. And so I thought I would do a little bit more investigation into this, because people are familiar with my channel. I'm not an astrologer. I have an interest in the cosmos. So understanding a little bit more about Venus and her cycle and her transition between the morning star, the evening star, and also the associated mythologies, which is a bit more my alley, especially when it comes to the various goddesses, I should say, which are connected in with Venus, like Aphrodite, Anahata, Hathor, Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte, etc. And also whether there's any historical evidence or what our early ancestors saw, well, how our early ancestors saw Venus and tracked Venus as well. So I've sort of put all of this together in this little presentation that I am calling, if I hit the right button to share my screen. Here we go. The Return of Venus. And we have this beautiful image here called The Triumph of Venus by Francois Bourget. And I hope that you're curious about these aspects of Venus as much as I am. So let us begin. So first, I thought I'd start off with a little bit of background about Venus. As one of the brightest objects in our sky, Venus has been known basically since prehistoric times, and as such has been a major influence in our culture for as long as records have existed. So she's had a rather predominant position in myth, in religion, and not to mention also prime inspirer for poets, for writers, as both the morning star and the evening star, these two aspects to her. And the reason why she does appear in our skies as two aspects of her cycle is what's known as the synodic period, or synodic cycle of Venus, which takes a total of 584 days, which is around about 19 months for her to complete. I'm calling it her planet her because Venus is named after a Roman goddess, and we'll go into a little bit later. And so there is a sort of feminine aspect associated with her, or with the planet. So when we first see Venus on the eastern horizon at dawn, every day for the next 263 days, she rises a little earlier, climbs a little higher, and then starts to even shine a little brighter before she reaches a peak to where her light is actually drowned out by the sun. And this is because, as we see in this image, her relationship between the sun and our planet. So when she is actually behind the sun, this is what's called the superior conjunction, and she appears to disappear from our skies for a period of some 50 days. Then she reappears, this time as an evening star, almost reversing the pattern. So rising a little later every day, shining a little dimmer every day, and coming closer and closer to the horizon until she fails to rise again. And this is when she's positioned between the Earth and the sun, and this is known as her inferior conjunction. So her superior conjunction is when she's behind the sun, and her inferior conjunction is when she's right in front of the sun. But she only stayed in her inferior conjunction for 8 days before she emerges once more as the morning star on the eastern horizon, and then the whole cycle of these 584 days continues. So it is depending on the point in that cycle where Venus may appear just before sunrise in the morning or just after sunset in the evening. And because of this angle, the ancient Greeks initially thought that she was 2 stars. But this wasn't shared by all ancient peoples, because the Sumerians were aware that the morning star that they saw and the evening star that they also saw some 300 odd days later was the same celestial object. And they knew this from as early as the Gemdic Nasher period, which dates from around about 3100 to 2900 BCE. And there's evidence of this on a cylinder seal dating back from that period. So that predates the ancient Greeks. And it's round about late July that Venus emerges from her 50 days absence from our skies as the evening star. And this is what has just she's just reappeared the last couple of weeks in the astrological sign of Leo. She's been conjunct to Regulus, which is the royal star, and also situated at the heart of the Leo constellation. So if we're looking at this from a more metaphysical perspective or esoteric perspective, the timing of Venus when she appears after her 50 days absence as the evening star can be interpreted as giving us the opportunity to pause, to drop into our heart space, because she's conjunct with Regulus, and asking her to guide us in our own process of taking time to reflect, to heal, and to deepen our connection with the cosmic consciousness, and then being able to integrate that and share that out into the world from our heart with the courage that comes from the Leo, the lion. And it is this reemergence of Venus that reminds us of the important aspect that we need in reintegrating the wisdom and the energies of the sacred feminine. And this is what she represents, how we bring these into balance with those of the sacred masculine, not the toxic masculinity that seems to be very predominant these days, but the sacred masculinity. And when we allow this to happen, we are able to tap back into the sacredness of life all around us. And this is what Venus teaches us. She teaches us the meaning of right relationship with ourselves, with each other, and also with all life around us, for all beings or aspects of our planet. I was going to say sentient beings, which may not be Buddhist. Everything that's around us. She guides us in how to live from our hearts with this love, this divine love, this compassion, this divine wisdom, which unfortunately seems to be something that's rather forgotten in these rather extremely polarized, divided world that we seem to be living in at the moment. Also, with the intensity of these times, she offers us a way to sort of connect back into our own sense of being, and shows us how to find these ways to stay more centered, being more in line with our heart and our true soul self. So almost getting us to move away from our ego, from our hedonistic I am attitude or perception that we have been encouraged to sort of step into and focus on in a more sort of patriarchal dominated world. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, Venus has played a long, predominant role in human culture. And what I would like to do now is just share some mythological connections about Venus and some of her counterparts all around the world. So the star, well, she's actually a planet, Venus, of course, is named after the Roman goddess Venus, who was also known by the Greeks as Aphrodite. And in fact, there's a lot of similarities between the two. And there's also very strong connections with the ancient Babylonian and Sumerian goddesses of Ishtar and Inanna. This is Ishtar here. So some scholars do think it's Inanna. With Venus being a goddess of love and beauty, she's also associated with brushes such as Yamaya and also Oshun. So this is Oshun here. She's also connected with Hathor from the ancient Greeks, Parvati from Hindu cultures or pantheons, Freya from the North pantheon, and there are probably many more that I have not mentioned here. And while most of these goddesses tend to have their own sacred stories, the story of Venus appears to have been heavily influenced by the Greek Aphrodite, even down to her emergence from the sea, as is so beautifully depicted in Botticelli's painting entitled The Birth of Venus. So, as the Greeks were the forerunners to the Roman Empire, influencing a lot of the gods and goddesses that emerged from the Roman Empire, Aphrodite is probably the forerunner to Venus. However, Aphrodite's own myth tends to predate the arrival of the Olympian god. And in one of the older Greek myths about her origins, Aphrodite is said to have emerged from the sea foam that was formed when the genitals of Uranus, the original sky god, who was also a Titan, the race of giants that the Olympian gods eventually overthrew. And when his genitals were thrown into the sea, this was because he was then castrated by his son Cronus, Father Time. Cronus just happened to be the father of Zeus. So Aphrodite emerged from the sea foam, fully formed and beautiful, and was carried to the seashore in a shell that was pushed along by the winds, as we see here Botticelli's painting. What is really interesting about Aphrodite is that her birthplace is believed to have been in Cyprus and not actually a place in Greece. Again, hinting at possibly an earlier origin to the story. And because of the migrations and the blendings of people, it can be very difficult to sort of pin down to which is the correct original story. Scholars, in fact, also believe that Aphrodite is over 7,000 years old. This is because she has roots linking her to the Phoenician goddess Astarte. And it was Astarte who brought in this connection with the star, the planet Venus in the sky. Then again, Astarte is thought to have emerged from the Babylonian or the Achaean goddess Ishtar, who's also connected with the planet Venus in the sky. And before Ishtar, as I mentioned earlier, there was Inanna from the ancient Sumerians, dating back to the 4th millennium BCE. And again, due to all these migrations, there have been a lot of integration, shall we say, of all these stories, or they may have actually been something like they've been connecting into, say, a collective consciousness, is what Carl Jung talks about, where groups of peoples or from various parts of the world all had a similar deity. And we've seen that in other cultures and other sort of aspects where local peoples would have deities associated with springs, with wells, with sacred sites, like mountains, and you will see that all around the world as well. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole today. So Venus's connection with Inanna is another interesting one, not only as a goddess, but also from a celestial angle. Now, in ancient Mesopotamia, which is the area that includes the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Akkadians, and then there was the Hittites that came through as well. So we're looking at all the area around Iraq, Iran, and what they call the Fertile Crescent. In ancient Mesopotamia, the 8-pointed star, which we see here, is sometimes actually used as a symbol associated with Venus, but it's known as the Star of Inanna, with reference to the Sumerian goddess. And a boundary stone has been found that dates back to the 12th century BCE that shows the Star of Inanna, but also the solar disk over here that represents her brother Shamash, and the crescent moon, which is here, which is their father, Sin. So we have a whole celestial family, Inanna, Shamash, and their father, Sin. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the ancient Sumerians were aware of the disappearing and rare appearance of what we know today as Venus as being the same celestial object dating back to the Janat-Nasha period. And this dual role seems to reflect that of Inanna and also later Ishtar, in that both these goddesses are connected with love, but also war, and therefore they seem to both preside over, say, birth and life, as well as death. So there is this sort of dual aspect to them. And there's another interesting aspect in relation to the disappearance and reemergence of Venus, the star of the planet, and its connection with Inanna. And that is, of course, Inanna's own disappearance into the underworld, and then her frequent or subsequent return in the story, The Descent of Inanna. Now, Inanna, after all, was known as the Queen of Heaven, and for various reasons, she wanted to visit her sister, Ishtar, who is the Queen of the Underworld. And the story is often used as a backdrop to shadow work or shadow exploration today, and I even cover it in my own book, Encountering the Dark Goddess, Journey to the Shadow Realms, although my focus there has been more on Ishtar. Very briefly, the story goes that dressing in all her finery and gathering together all her status symbols, Inanna begins to descend into the underworld, only to be forced to surrender something at each of the 7 gates that she comes up to, until she finally emerges through the last gate, where she is naked and bent low before her sister Ishtar. I won't go too much into the details of the story, but Ishmael didn't really appreciate this sort of invasion, set her death stare onto Inanna, kills Inanna, puts Inanna on a hook where she stays for 3 days and 3 nights before she is then rescued, and he then emerges. However, while she's on this meat hook and through that emerging process, Inanna tends to go through a journey of transformation, i.e. from the Queen of Heaven, Venus, the evening star, entering the underworld where she faces Ishgagul, her dark sister, which is perceived as the time when Venus disappears from view during her inferior conjunction for those 8 days. And then after going a sort of a deep soul level transformation, Inanna returns to the surface again, to the upper worlds, just as Venus does in our sky, this time as the morning star, reconfiguring her self of identity for that period of 9 months, the 263 days in her cycle, before she disappears again during her superior conjunction for the 50 days. And then the whole cycle continues again. What I do find interesting about the story of Inanna, especially when we compare her to other goddesses in other cultures, is that she is often described just as the Queen of Heaven and nothing else, like she's not a mother goddess. So this sort of indicates that maybe she originated from even an earlier culture, or sort of evolved from an earlier goddess. And looking around, say, the goddesses that the ancient Sumerians were believed to have observed around about the 6th century BCE, is this figure that we see on the left, which is Ninjagal. And her name actually means Lady of the Sacred Mother, so Lady of the Sacred Mountain. And she was also referred to as being the true and great Lady of Heaven who gave birth to all the other gods. She ruled over fertility and the crops, and was often found depicted in a seated position, being surrounded by plants and trees. Although this image here, she's not. But having a goddess seated and surrounded by animals or plants is reflected in later cultures, in particular the Phrygian. Now, I used to pronounce this goddess Sibyl, but I have heard more academics saying it's Kybele. So I'm not sure as to what's the correct pronunciation, if it's Kybele or it's Sibyl. But there is this wonderful mountain mother, prehistoric mountain mother, that it's being led to believe that Nishargog is actually one of that sort of family, should we say. So was Nishargog the original mother goddess from the ancient peoples of the lands we call ancient Sumeria or Sumer, who were developing agriculture and farming. And this is the important part, because Inanna doesn't have much to do, though her partner, her husband, Dumuzi, is the shepherd. Inanna herself isn't perceived or portrayed very much as the sort of mother goddess figure. As I mentioned, there are migratory waves all around that area. So who knows how Inanna and even Ishtar emerged. They might have, the reason why they are a bit more warlike could have been because of the migrational aspects of the migration tribes. I'm just repeating myself. So it is something to think about. But I'm getting down a little bit of a rabbit hole and far away from Venus. So what I might do now is return to some of these goddesses that are connected with the Venus aspects of Venus, which are love and beauty. And as I did mention earlier, the ancient Egyptians realized that there was a morning and an evening star that were the same celestial object, and they realized this from around about the 2nd millennium BCE, and there is a possibility that this was due to Mesopotamian influence. But they described this star, this planet, as a phoenix or the Bennu bird, as we see here on the right. This is the Bennu bird. The planet or star was also known as the crosser, or the star with crosses. And it is believed that Venus, as the planet, was connected originally with Osiris. Then during the late period, Venus was depicted as a two-headed morning god, a human head and a falcon head. And the falcon head, of course, is connected with Horus. And then this is sort of evidenced by the Dundera zodiac. And then later during the Hellenistic period, the Greeks associated the cow goddess Hathor with Aphrodite. So all very interesting. I would like to mention another goddess who sort of caught up in this sort of collectiveness, and that is the ancient Persian goddess Anahata, because she's also connected with Venus. Originally, Anahata was associated with water, fertility, wisdom, warfare, and then eventually the planet Venus. And while not very prominent before the Achaemenid dynasty, it was around this time that cult statues of her started to emerge. And these actually changed Anahata's description from that of a rather wild personification of a raging river to one of a more serene ruler with a golden crown, and golden shoes and golden necklace and jewelry. It's interesting to note that one of her titles is the Anahed Aberixti, referring to Venus. And there is also a view that Anahata's connection with Venus possibly stemmed from the goddess being connected with the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, who was, as we know, associated with Venus as she appears in the evening sky. Now, the truth be told is that the Venus Aphrodite goddess that we are familiar today with being a goddess of love and beauty, to the Romans, possibly to the ancient Greeks, she was more commonly described as a goddess of passion and desire. So not merely the romanticized love that we think of her today. And this desire can include the desire for power, for conquest. And this again is sort of evidence with the expansion of the Roman Empire, which also explains why she appeared on all these coins. So let us circle back to Venus in our night sky. And as mentioned earlier, when Venus emerges or reemerges in our skies, because she is the evening star, she is conjunct Regulus, which is the royal star of the north, part of Leo. And as she is sort of descending, she's getting closer to the horizon. Yet she's still the first and the brightest star that we see in the western sky. And because she moves very quickly, more quickly than the Earth around the sun, she takes only 9 months. Then she catches up with the Earth again, and this is why we have the superior and the inferior injunctions. but we don't see her. So in 9 months' time, she'll disappear from our sky again before she reemerges 8 days later in the east as the morning star. Okay. So while it was named after a Roman planet or a Roman goddess of beauty, when we look at Venus, the planet itself, the second planet in our solar system from the sun, Venus is anything but. It is actually a world of storms and infernos that can actually not be found anywhere else in our solar system. And from a more scientific perspective, Venus and Earth, our planet, actually does have a lot in common. They're both around the same size. They're both made up very similar structure with an iron core, then cased in a layer of hot mantle covered with a rocky crust. However, Venus's crust is dotted with thousands of volcanoes, including one that is actually the same height as the Himalayas. The atmosphere of Venus consists of thick clouds that rain sulfuric acid, that circulate the planet with speeds up to 224 miles per hour. I don't know how much that is in Ks, but that is very fast. The atmosphere of Venus is so thick that it is believed to create the surface pressure that is equal to that of being half a mile deep in the Earth's ocean, and as such would actually crush a human being standing on it. The atmosphere contains greenhouse gases, largely carbon dioxide, which have been trapped or which trap the sun's heat, causing temperatures to rise over 470 degrees Celsius, and that is 880 degrees Fahrenheit. And this makes Venus the hottest planet in our solar system, and not hot in a good way. As Venus reflects about 70% of all sunlight that reaches the planet, this is why Venus shines so brightly, especially when compared to other planets or other stars in our sky. And this makes her more noticeable, and the reason why for many a millennia, us humans have noticed her, have recorded about her, have based our deities on her, named them after her, and she has fascinated us. So I would like to end this presentation by sharing this passage from The Key of Theosophy by Helena Blavatsky, who wrote, "No star among countless myriads that twinkle over the sidereal fields of the night sky shines so dazzlingly as the planet Venus. Not even Sirius Sophus, the dog star, beloved by Isis." It's interesting to note that Isis was also referred to as the Queen of Heaven. Venus is the queen among our planets, the crown jewel of our solar system. She is the inspirer of the poet, the guardian and companion of the lonely shepherd, the lovely morning and evening star. For stars teach as well as shine. Although their secrets are still untold and unrevealed to the majority of men, including astronomers, they are a beauty and a mystery, verily. And we're back to The Triumph of Venus by Francois Bouchet. So I do hope, and I might just stop sharing my screen now. you have enjoyed this little presentation about Venus, so gather a little bit more information as to why she is a morning star and an evening star, and also as a deity, the other goddesses that are connected with her. I'm not an astrologer. If there are any other aspects in relation to Venus in this role that you feel I should be including into this presentation, please put comments below. I do go back and look at them and take them on board. And it also helps me in my own sort of study and exploration research into these topics. So take care, and I hope to see you again soon. Blessings.